In tonight's stories, two small towns learn that some traditions never die. In the first, children in a starving post-war village summon something from the woods, a perfect trick-or-treater who still collects his candy and his sacrifices. In the second, a bullied schoolgirl brings a doll to class that moves when she speaks and punishes anyone who crosses her. Two tales of ritual, revenge, and the terrifying innocence of childhood. Welcome to Nightmare Proof, where true horror comes alive. Here, you'll hear real stories of the strange, the disturbing, and the unexplainable. Turn down the lights, get comfortable, and prepare to face the darkness. The origins of the perfect trick-or-treater. Seeing as how it's now October, and that crisp fall air is beginning to envelope the country, I figured now would be as good a time as ever to fill you guys in on a little Halloween tradition that my small town has carried out for the last 100 or so years. It all started back in 1920. My town, much like many others, was recovering from the catastrophic event known as World War I. There had been so much death and hopelessness ravaging the country. Sons returning home, missing arms and legs, wives who had to learn to live once more without their husbands. And after the war, America entered its post-war state. Doing so led to the explosion of consumerism and entrepreneurship. People wanted to live rather than die, obviously, right? With that mass influx of businesses and economic growth, many small towns such as my own faced two options: adapt or fail. Many adapted, many failed. My town, in particular, held on for dear life to tradition. I wasn't around, but from the stories I've heard, not many people wanted to abandon the way things were, essentially. So, for the first 5 years of the roaring 20 seconds, that's exactly how they kept things, as they were. However, with each passing year, the town's economic growth hit a new low, and it eventually reached the point where there were more unemployed people than those who were employed. The homeless lined the streets, and politicians sweated profusely at town hearings about the sheer state of everything. And guess what? Despite all of the poverty and despair, the businesses that managed to stay open would welcome children, excitedly, every Halloween night, with at least one small treat for each of them. It was the least they could do for children being brought up in such horrible circumstances. The kids would cherish this night more than any other night of the year, surpassing even Christmas. Why, you may ask? Because their parents couldn't afford to put a roof over their heads, let alone buy them treats and gifts for Christmas and Thanksgiving. These kids would be lucky to get a burnt slice of bread with how scarce everything was. Halloween was the one night when businesses felt they could actually make a difference. They didn't have to provide meals for a full community. Toys for Tots didn't exist back then. All they had to do was give these poor kids one measly piece of candy on one single night per year. That's it. Back then, these kids didn't have the Party Cities and Walmarts of today. Their costumes were comprised of boxes and old trash from the street, but man, did they make do. Eventually, they realized that the better the costume, the better your odds of scoring more candy. The creativity flourished in these kiddos. Imagination possessed them like a spirit in the week leading up to Halloween. Whether consciously or not, these merchants began to show favoritism, and it reached the point where the person with the best costume was getting all of the candy, while the others were left to receive but one piece. This led to rivalries being created between the children, and rather than being the friends they once were, they instead resented one another. Halloween became more of a competition rather than a holiday. Not only did the children grow to resent each other, but they also grew to resent their own parents. Why was it so hard to grow? So hard to do what was best for them? Instead, they were forcing them to find solace in the garbage from the street, hoping to make a good impression on whatever business owner showed enough pity to give them a candy bar or two. With that resentment came disbandment. There came whispers and rumors of echoes of children's laughter coming from the forest. The children began conspiring on their own, deep within the woods. Parents didn't even realize they were gone. They were so caught up in their own business. Now, this is the part that's hard to explain, and please remember, I'm recalling this to share with you an active tradition within my town. Apparently, Whilst conducting these daily meetings in the woods, the children managed to summon something that granted them what they wanted most. See, they came to realize that Halloween was a competition. They wanted something. They had to prove they wanted it more than the other person. And that's where the costumes came in. It wasn't about who had it the worst. It was about who could impress the person in charge more. Rather than compete, these children devised a plan amongst themselves. They would band together to create the perfect costume, the perfect specimen for this Halloween tradition. They'd take a vote, and whoever received the most votes became the candidate for that year's trick-or-treating session. By year 4, they had all banded together to create the perfect trick-or-treater. They weren't using the same old cardboard boxes and milk cartons this year, though. This year, they had taken a new approach. The week before Halloween, the children went off into the woods, scavenging the wilderness for animals and insects that they'd catch and kill. They smeared the blood and guts all over the trick-or-treater, ripping his clothes and covering him in dirt. The aim: make little Tommy look like a returning veteran, traumatized by the horrors of war. Once they finished, they stood back and took in their creation. Tommy looked utterly terrifying. But something was off. "He don't look like how my dad did when he got back," spouted Jackson. "Yeah, same here. He looks too innocent," added Susie. Come on, guys," Tommy pleaded. "I've already got all this gunk on me. What more do you need me to do?" As they sat and pondered, suddenly Billy stood up as though a light bulb had lit up in his head. "I've got it," he shouted before approaching Tommy. Without warning, Billy cocked back and punched Tommy as hard as he could, square in the jaw. Tommy fell over, crying. In the midst of his fit, Tommy was tackled to his back by Billy, who held him there while demanding that Jackson go retrieve a giant rock that lay against a tree a few meters away. Jackson, unsure of the severity of the situation, as well as intimidated by Billy at the moment, obliged and retrieved the rock. Billy raised the rock above his head before slamming it down with incredible force against Tommy's leg. A sickening snap filled the air as Tommy began to scream. Billy quickly covered his mouth before pleading with the others. "It's got to look real. We'll get more candy if it looks real. Besides, it's just his leg. It'll heal." Tommy's eyes were flooded with tears, and his nose had begun pouring blood from when Billy socked him. Feeling trapped, he bit down as hard as he could onto Billy's hand, causing him to jump and react by punching Tommy yet again. Tommy, now in fear for his own life, tried desperately to crawl away. Billy had none of it, however, and grabbed Tommy forcefully by the ankle before dragging him back to the circle. Screaming and begging for someone to help, Billy had to silence Tommy. He tried reasoning with him. He tried making him see that if he just sucked it up for this one night, he'd never have to do it again. Tommy would not listen whatsoever, obviously, and in the end, Tommy ended up being knocked unconscious with the rock used to break his leg. When he awoke, it was dusk, and he was tied to one of the trees. He found himself struggling to move, blurry-eyed. In the thick forest surrounding him, he could hear the whirring giggles of thousands of children. The booming echoes of hundreds upon hundreds of lost souls, many more ancient than the very ground in which Tommy sat, restrained by itchy ropes. Tommy could feel the earth shaking beneath him, rumbling violently. Tears began to fill his eyes once more, and his heart started to race. Through his clouded vision, he could see a towering fire blazing before his eyes. The heat was so intense that sweat began to trickle down his face, stinging his open wounds. The giggling turned to chanting, and the once chaotic shaking of the earth became collected and organized. The rhythmic thumping of hundreds of dancing feet caused the dirt to bounce and stir. In cacophony with the thumps, the bellowing of chants rang out through the air. "Trick or treat, trick or treat, give us something good to eat. Trick or treat, give us something good to eat." The deafening cries pierced Tommy's eardrums and caused his head to pound. His vision began to clear, and within the fire, he beheld something that froze his blood to ice, even in the presence of such scorching heat. From the flames, a pitch-black smoke rose into the air, swirling and circulating unnaturally. The flames licked the sky, and the black smoke poured out in billows. Tommy watched in horror as the substance mutated and shifted. It twisted and turned violently, almost like a tornado, before taking the shape of a creature, floating above the flames. Now, I say creature very loosely here. What Tommy saw was more of a force of nature than a creation. Horns sprouted from the black mass, and the rage-filled screams of 1,000 fallen armies poured from its mouth. The children continued their chanting, while Tommy remained strapped to the tree, petrified. "Trick or treat! Trick or treat! Give us something good to eat!" The smoke howled and shrieked, shattering Tommy's eardrums and causing them to bleed. The flames licked the sky one last time before the smoke disconnected from the fire entirely and soared directly into Tommy. The mass held his mouth open wide, inhumanly wide, as it slid its way down his throat and into his circulatory system. Tommy felt the burning of his throat and lungs, and his eyes stung ferociously as he passed out once more. What awoke was not Tommy. Tommy had been beaten. His soul had been cast away, forced to join the thousands of others, giggling through the dense forest trees. What awoke was the perfect trick-or-treater. Tommy's face was now smooth and free of blemishes. His eyes were now cold and soulless. His hair was pushed gently to the side, and his jaw remained set. However, Tommy's new body was that of nightmares. A body that was the reality for so many. His chest had developed bullet holes. They oozed and pussed with infection, leaving Tommy's new outfit soaked with a disgusting red and white mixture of bodily fluids. His left arm was completely mangled and hung limp from his shoulder, positioned at an angle only possible through the breaking of several bones. Perhaps the worst part of all, however, was Tommy's leg. His right leg had been torn to shreds, and blood fell profusely from the gaping wound, staining the ground. Billy, Susie, and every child present knelt before Tommy. Nervously, Billy approached him. This is for you." In Billy's outstretched hand lay a potato sack. Tommy's mangled arm cracked and bent as he snatched the bag from Billy. It was all part of the plan. With the speed of an athlete, Tommy hopped on his leg through the forest and into the town. Businesses were preparing for the holiday by standing out at their entrances, treat bowls in hand. As Tommy came into view, many of the owners began to applaud and gawk at his costume. However, as he drew nearer, it became evident that Tommy wasn't wearing a costume at all. He approached the first owner, bag outstretched. "Trick or treat," he grunted. Of course, seeing the state of the boy, instead of handing out the treat, the man ran away screaming. Tommy was quick to pursue, catching up to the man in mere seconds. He tackled the man to the ground, clawing violently at his face and chest. Blood spewed from the man, painting the buildings and sidewalk with bright red splatter. Tommy picked the man clean, pulling out his heart and internal organs before stuffing them deep into his bag. The business owners stood and watched in astonishment as the boy then placed his bag at the top of the man's head and then proceeded to insert the man's entire body into the potato sack, grunting and growling like an animal the entire time. Once the man had completely disappeared, Tommy simply sat up and hopped over to the next business owner, face as perfect as ever. Trick or treat. Learning from the previous owner's mistakes, the woman emptied the entire bowl into Tommy's bag before locking herself inside her building. Tommy then proceeded to the next owner, repeating the process. He hit business after business, taking in bowl after bowl of delicious treats into his never-ending bag. Once every business had been paid a visit, Tommy returned to the woods. The fire continued to blaze, and dozens of costumed children waited in anticipation as the boy hobbled over the horizon. Once he reached the fire, he turned his bag upside down, dumping a pile of candy onto the ground. He poured for 5 minutes straight before the last piece of candy fell from the bag. Once it did, Tommy then moved to a new space on the ground. He laid his bag flat and began to tug. Slowly, the decomposing body of the first business owner began to reveal itself. His skin had been stripped away, and only a few scarce patches of hair remained on his head. Black smoke came from the fire again, lifting the body from the ground and pulling it into the flames. Once the body came in contact with the first flame, the fire roared and blazed with what seemed to be the heat of 1,000,000 suns. As I told you, these children summoned something, and that something demanded satisfaction. If it got that satisfaction, these children were promised that they would never spend another holiday alone on the streets. As is the case with many situations such as this, that satisfaction came at a price. That price? Any business owner who dares defy the orders of the perfect trick-or-treater. Every year, this ritual is repeated in my town. The same fire still burns. The same ancient echoes come from the trees. Every year, the perfect trick-or-treater is selected, and every year, the business owners in town know exactly what is demanded of them. We've had a few newcomers come by, trying to plant roots, if you will. We warn them. We tell them every September that they better start stocking up on candy. Some listen, others don't. We actually just had a new guy come in just last week. Opened up his own little restaurant, smack dab in the middle of town. He's already had a few people knocking on his door, urging him to prepare himself. I guess we'll just have to see if he listens. Show and tell it was a Monday morning at West Knob Elementary. In one of the classrooms, a few minutes after the first bell rang, the lights flashed a few times in succession. Within an instant, what had been total pandemonium was substituted with perfect order. In 1986, every first grader knew exactly what the flashing lights meant. Be seated, be quiet, be on your best behavior, because Mrs. Beck has entered the room, and she would sanction no unruly behavior. The hickory paddle, which hung between the alphabet banner and the chalkboard, served as a clear reminder of this irrefutable truth. 3 months earlier, Chloe March learned this the hard way. It was her first day of class in a new school, and as the other children scuttled to their seats at the warning of the overhead lights, she continued at play. Her arms were fully extended airplane style, while she spun herself in little circles, eyes shut and laughing. Her frivolity ended the second her head was jerked back by an assailant. Someone had hold of her ponytail and was pulling her toward her desk by it. Chloe stared up through teary eyes at her attacker. A 1,000-foot-tall teacher with iron gray hair and an ugly scowl glared back down at the little girl. That will be enough of that behavior, young lady. The teacher huffed and slapped her hand down on Chloe's desk. I don't know what sort of conduct your teachers tolerated where you came from, little miss, but rest assured that I expect proper decorum from my students. When it's time for class to begin, you're to be seated, looking forward, and quiet. Do we understand one another? Chloe's head hurt from where the teacher pulled her hair and dragged her. But being made a spectacle of in front of the entire class, that was a special kind of pain. So, she submitted no reply but sat in defiant silence. I asked you a question. Answer me. Chloe's face was as red as an October leaf. She balled up her little fists, relaxed them, and then repeated the process. She wanted to shout for all to hear, but her boiling anger only allowed for a whimper. I don't like you, she said. It was enough. Mrs. Beck knew she had a problem with this one. And problems left undealt with grew into even greater problems still. Chloe learned all she needed to know about her new teacher that day, and about the plank of wood that hung above the chalkboard. Now, 3 months later, Chloe sat in her seat. She was quiet, with both hands folded gently on top of her desk. She'd been seated long before any of the other students. But from time to time, her eyes gravitated to the little pink book bag sitting on the floor by her desk, and she would smile. For the first time since moving to West Knob, she was excited for the school day, because they were about to do show and tell. As Mrs. Beck clopped by Chloe's desk, she barked at her, "Get that bag out of the aisle before someone trips over it." Chloe lifted the pack and put it on her desk. Book bags go in the closet, Miss March. You know that. My show and tell is in here, ma'am. You'll refer to me as Mrs. Beck, not ma'am, the teacher said, taking her seat at her desk. And book bags go in the closet. You can get it when it's your turn to present. Now do as you're told, or you'll spend show and tell in the corner. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Beck, Chloe said, then ambled over to the closet. And because you've disrupted class, and because you're making all of us wait on you, you'll stay inside first recess. Chloe's classmates giggled at this, but were hushed by their teacher, who rapped her knuckles on top of her desk, just like a judge banging a gavel. Chloe didn't protest. She couldn't afford to. She knew what would follow if she tried. So the little girl hung the backpack on a vacant hook and returned to her seat in quiet obedience. Mrs. Beck sorted papers atop her desk into a tidy pile and surveyed the class, then started roll call. The student named would stand, say, "Here," and remain standing. Chloe didn't understand the tradition. The class consisted of only 13 students. Surely Mrs. Beck could tell at a glance whether or not any of them were missing. When all were accounted for and standing, their teacher led them in the Pledge of Allegiance. Chloe thought it would never end, but at last came the closing words as she knew them. With liver tea and just us, for all. Whatever that was supposed to mean. When the students sat back, down, Mrs. Beck stood at the front of the class and addressed them. "Today, we'll start first period by presenting your show and tell. Do you remember what your theme should be?" "Yes," the students answered in a synchronized and sing-song voice. "What is the theme of today's show and tell?" Mrs. Beck asked, and a few hands raised tentatively. She called on Brian Banning, the boy who sat directly behind Chloe. Brian liked to flick Chloe's ears, and sometimes he would shoot gooey paper balls at the back of her head through a straw. But only when Mrs. Beck wasn't watching, of course. Thanks to those antics, in conjunction with trying to stick up for herself, Chloe was inevitably the one who would get punished. It wasn't just Brian who picked on her, though. All of the first grade class teased her and called her Grody instead of Chloe. They all laughed at her when Mrs. Beck disciplined her. But Chloe was confident that all of that would change after today. "Show and tell's theme is family and me," Brian answered. "That's right, Brian. So, your presentations should have some connection to both you and to one or more family members." The teacher returned to her seat, then said, "All right, let's get started. Jamie Allen, you're first. Step to the front of the class, please." Jamie came forward with a framed photograph. She rambled on about her trip to Disney World with her parents, the Haunted Mansion, and having her picture taken with her favorite princess, Cinderella. Brian came next. He carried a baseball bat that was almost as long as he was tall. He told all about his trip to Busch Stadium the previous summer with his dad. He bragged about getting to go out onto the field after the game and getting the bat signed by Ozzie Smith, Willie McGee, and a bunch of other people whom Chloe had never heard of. But the rest of the class acted impressed. Other kids took their turn, some with very short presentations, others meandering. Butterflies flittered madly in Chloe's stomach while Tiffany Lewis made her presentation. Chloe would be the next student called, and she could hardly contain her excitement. Tiffany brought pink frosted cupcakes that she and her mom supposedly baked together. They were a smash hit with the class. She took her sweet time walking up and down the aisles, handing one cupcake to each of the students. When she reached Chloe's desk, the last cupcake fell to the floor. "Oops," Tiffany said with a snotty little smile on her face. "I guess you could still eat it, Grody." Chloe's eyes narrowed, but she didn't say or do anything. She didn't want Tiffany's dumb cupcake anyway, and she sure didn't want trouble with Mrs. Beck. Not before she had a chance to show and tell. Chloe was the one who was told to clean up the mess, not Tiffany. She worried Mrs. Beck would skip her altogether if she argued or didn't do as she was told. But it was a quick job for her, and she wasted no time retrieving her backpack from the closet when she was called on for her turn. When she was in front of all her peers, and with her teacher's humorless eyes upon her, she realized just how nervous she really was. Her time had finally come. Her little heart felt like a hummingbird, desperately trying to fly free from her chest. Her hands trembled as she fumbled to unzip her bag. She gulped breath and tried to calm herself. "Okay," she began. I guess you all know that my mommy cuts hair. Eyes on your classmates, Miss March. Not your book bag." Chloe looked up at the class and blindly fought the zipper on the backpack. "I guess you all know my mommy cuts hair," she repeated. "I think she cuts almost all of your hair, and your mommy's, and some of your daddy's, too." "Miss March, does this have anything to do with what you'll be showing the class? Or are you just stalling for time?" "It does, Mrs. Beck, I promise." Chloe drew an invisible X on her chest and smiled at her teacher. "Where was I? Oh, yeah. Mommy cuts almost everybody's hair in town, even Mrs. Beck's. Chloe turned to face her teacher, then further elaborated. Although Mrs. Beck didn't want her to at first, but Mommy offered to style her hair free of charge for her first appointment. I think she did a really nice job on it too. It looks real pretty. Finally, the zipper cooperated and came open. Chloe continued, and she's real nice to all of you too, even though you're all very mean at me. Miss March, you're not going to use today's project as an excuse to speak disparagingly of the class. I won't have it. Now, did you bring something for show and tell or not? I did, Mrs. Beck, and I wasn't trying to despair anyone. Honest. Chloe turned her attention back to the class. You all knew Mommy did that, but I bet you didn't know she also collects and reads old books. Really old. And she learned to make dollies from one. She pulled out a crude-looking little doll from her book bag. It had a cruel face and iron gray hair. She held it so the whole class could see. 4 or 5 of the students openly laughed. Tiffany declared it the ugliest doll she'd ever seen, which garnered the laughter of the rest of the class. But Chloe was nonplussed. She held the doll in front of her with both hands and looked at it rather dreamily. I have lots and lots of them, she said, but this is my favorite. Her name is Edna. Chloe put a strange emphasis on the name, and Mrs. Beck shot up from her seat so fast that her chair rolled backwards and smashed into the wall. Nobody, not even other faculty, had the audacity to use the teacher's first name. Maybe it was just a coincidence, but more likely not. What little girl names her doll Edna? Your time is up. Put that thing away and take your seat, Miss March. No, Mrs. Beck, Chloe said, self-possessed. The classroom gasped. What did you say to me? I said no, and my time isn't up. Yours is. You mean old. Mean old bitch you. It was the first time in Chloe's life that she ever used that word, but in that instant, it reminded her of the taste of warm cinnamon toast on a cold winter morning. The other students squealed and guffawed as the color drained from Mrs. Beck's face. Her eyes trembled in their dark sockets. The teacher stormed over to the blackboard and reached for her hickory plank with a tremulous hand. Stop! Chloe's voice rang out, and then she commanded, Sit down, Mrs. Beck. Chloe folded the doll's legs so that they stuck straight out in front of it, and Mrs. Beck collapsed to the floor with a surprised yelp. Her own legs were sticking straight out with her toes pointing toward the ceiling. You pulled my hair on my first day of class, Mrs. Beck. Do you remember that? Huh? How do you like it then? Chloe pinched the doll's hair between her finger and thumb and allowed it to dangle in midair. Mrs. Beck was lifted from the floor and hung in the air by an unseen force. Both she and the rest of the class shrieked in horror. Her hair stood straight up and was bunched in the middle as if grasped by an invisible fist. The teacher squawked and thrashed about, but to no avail. None of the children left their seats. They were, all of them, petrified as they watched in terror and disbelief the events that transpired. Mrs. Beck's eyes rolled around like a crazed bull's until at last they fluttered shut when she fainted and her head fell limp. Chloe let go of the doll. Both it and her teacher crumpled to the floor. Chloe turned to face her schoolmates. I have lots of dollies, one for all of you, at least, so you better be nice to me. With that, Chloe smiled, a sweet little smile, and said no more. Chloe March showed her teacher and all of her classmates just what she, with her mother's help, was capable of that day. She told them to stop mistreating her or else. They saw, they listened. Thank you for watching Nightmare Proof. If you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to keep the nightmares alive. Have a story of your own? Send it in, and you may hear it here next time. Until then, sleep well, if you can.